This is the Last Man Standing podcast with your host, Richard James.
Hey, welcome back, gentlemen. Thank you for tuning back in to the Last Men Standing podcast. I'm your host, Richard James. On today's podcast, I'm asking the question, are you wicked and lazy? Are you wicked and lazy? One thing you're going to get a lot of on this podcast is scripture. And that's because I believe you can't discover true manhood apart from the scriptures. So today I'm reading from Matthew 25. There's a parable told by Jesus called the parable of the talents. A lot of people don't know what a talent actually was. It was a unit of measure, financial unit of measure that was equivalent, one talent was equivalent to nearly $500,000. I think about $400,000 by today's standards. So a talent had a lot of value. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. So the man was entrusting his servants with something of value before he left on a trip. And to one servant he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 talent went and dug it in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. And so the servant returned only exactly what he had been given from the master. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have at least deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's pretty intense. While there may be thousands of powerful takeaways that could be drawn from this story, I want to just focus on one simple picture of how the kingdom of heaven functions on earth. If a man can grasp this one principle and aligns his thoughts and actions to it, then I believe he'll have a positive result in his life. So 2,000 years ago, this talent represented a measure of gold, approximately $400,000 in value, which means that a talent equals resources. From the day a man's born, he's entrusted to steward an abundance of resources. Think about it. You were born into limited resources of time, with resource of parents and teachers who are willing to nurture and develop you. You were born with resources of healthy food options and clean water, a physical body that can walk, jump, lift, push, pull, carry, run. You were born with measures of specific, creative, intellectual, and physical gifts, and you've been given families and relationships to nurture. Do you have eyes that see? Then see. Do you have ears that hear? Then hear. Do you have something to say? Then speak it boldly. Is there a dream or a vision in your imagination that your heart burns to create? Well, you're responsible for making a move on that thing. How about your personality? Do you have a unique or even a quirky personality? Do you hide that personality in shame, or do you let it shine loud and proud because it's what you've been given? By no means is this an exhaustive list of resources. However, my wish is that it expands your thinking to see that you've been given so much to take advantage of, to build with, to capitalize on, and to multiply from. There really is no real lack in your life, but rather an abundance of resources available for you to utilize if you just open your eyes to it. What do you have to work with? Think about it. There's a couple of other Bible stories that come to mind that ask this question. The first is found in 2 Kings 4, where a widow comes to the prophet Elisha with some debt problems that she inherited. And it was going to lead to her sons being turned into slaves. The prophet asked her, "What do you have in your house?" And the woman explained very dramatically, "I have nothing in my house except for this little jar of oil." Now remember the parable of the talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance, or she. The story of the woman and Elisha ends with abundance as she ultimately ends up with a house full of oil that she is able to sell and pay off her debt with. If you read the story in 2 Kings 4, the long version is much better than the abbreviated version I just gave you. But another story that asks the question, "What do you have?" is found in John 6. In this story, Jesus is speaking to a massive crowd. It's known as Jesus feeding the 5,000. Although some scholars believe there was as many as 15 to 20,000 people there. Well, there became an unexpected need to feed all these people, which would be a physically impossible task. And what happened next was supernatural. This is what it says. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down. There will be plenty of grass in that place." And they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Again, it may be 15 to 20. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same thing with the fish. When they had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." I want you to think about that. They only had that small amount of food. And now he's actually saying, after feeding all of these people, potentially even 20,000 people, he's saying, "Hey, I know there's a lot left over, but let's let none of it go to waste." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. It's crazy. Now again, remember the parable of the talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. You've been entrusted with so much, but what frame have you put around your life and your future? Do you see abundance, or do you see lack? Are you joyful about your future, or are you anxious? Well, your worldview informs every decision you make. Your beliefs are what cause you to take a step forward into a glorious future or shrink back in paralyzing fear of the unknown. The decisions we make in the use or neglect of these assets will make us one of two kinds of men. One, a good and faithful man who receives increase, abundance. Or two, a wicked and lazy man who receives decrease, poverty. The parable of the talents shows us that excuses are not acceptable. Being afraid or not ready or not educated enough or not confident enough or experienced enough is not going to get you a well done, good and faithful servant. Rather, these excuses bring judgment on the wicked and lazy man because he chose to stay in his comfort zone. Don't be that guy. My challenge to you today, friend, is that you would live your life with your eyes wide open to the amazing gifts that God has put inside of you. Take ownership of these abundant resources. Reject all fear and execute out of these resources. Take these stories from the Bible into your spirit and let the word become flesh in you so that you will have success. That's it for today. I'm Richard James.
Thanks for listening to the Last Man Standing podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. Visit our weekly blog at lastmen.us.